新托福百日百句百篇上册，中国人民大学出版社出版，作者刘文勇。
Life in tide pools. Tide, the periodic rise and fall of all ocean waters, results from the gravitational attraction of the moon and the sun upon the water and upon the earth itself. In most areas, two high tides and two low tides typically occur within a 24-hour and 50-minute lunar day. A lunar day is 50 minutes longer than a solar day, and in most coastal regions, one of the daily high tides is higher than the other high tide, and one of the low tides is lower than the other. Such differences between the highest and lowest tides are called the tidal range. The intertidal zone is the shore area within the tidal range. Scientists have divided the intertidal area, also called the littoral zone, into four main zones. Splash zone is never covered by water and is only sprayed with salt water during high tides. High intertidal zone is covered with salt water only during high tides. Middle intertidal zone is covered and uncovered twice a day by the tides, and low intertidal zone is only uncovered during the lowest of tides. As the tides move in and out, the ocean's shores, a mixture of both land and sea, are never the same from one moment to the next. The boundary between land and sea constantly changes with the tide's rhythmic rise and fall. When the tide retreats, seawater trapped in depressions in the rocks forms tide pools. Tide pools can be found at any of the different intertidal zones, mostly in the low intertidal. They can either be small and shallow or large and deep. The small ones are usually found far back on the shore, and the large ones are found nearer to the ocean. These shallow pools and surrounding areas are uncovered by the retreating tides and are often teeming with animals and plants. Most of the animals are hardy organisms, such as sea stars, mussels, and clams, which are fairly simple compared to other kinds of sea animals, such as fishes and whales. The environment of a tide pool poses both advantages and challenges to its inhabitants. On the one hand, algae and other intertidal plants grow in the abundant sunlight and support an entire food chain of animals. Constant wave action supplies the tide pool with nutrients and oxygen, and a varied substrate provides hiding places and surfaces to cling to. On the other hand, however, inhabitants must be able to cope with a constantly changing environment, fluctuations in water temperature, salinity, and oxygen content. Plentiful sunlight, which helps intertidal plant life grow quickly, can also rapidly dry up precious moisture and increase the water temperature. Waves that bring in much needed nutrients and moisture can also carry unprotected animals out to sea. As the tides rise and fall, the salinity, salt concentration, constantly changes, and animals living in the intertidal zone must be able to tolerate wide salinity variations. If sufficient nutrients are available, intertidal animals reproduce rapidly, so they constantly compete for space, light, and food. Animals are also exposed to predators while the tide is out. In response to the intimidating challenges, tide pool animals and plants develop certain adaptive strategies to better live in the intertidal zones. For example, the archery sea star can tolerate a longer time period of being exposed to air than many other sea stars. They regularly withstand up to 8 hours of exposure during low tides. In laboratory conditions, they have tolerated up to 50 hours out of the water with little harm. Many fishes that inhabit tide pools, such as tide pool sculpin and young opales, can breathe air at the surface, an adaptation that enables them to survive in oxygen-poor water when the tide is out. Humans, historically and currently, have been harvesting animals and plants from the tide pools for food, bait, and more recently, for home aquariums. As human populations continue to increase along coastlines, more people have access to the tide pools, impacting many of the plants and animals that rely upon this habitat. Many pool animals, like the black abalone, prized for its shell and meat, are now scarce or absent in areas where they were once abundant. Therefore, the collection of any animals or plants is now regulated in many countries. Many animals and plants are also protected in marine sanctuaries and monuments.